This week, join us as we take on a trip above the Arctic Circle to look for two subjects we've been wanting to see in the wild for ages. So join us in this video and see if we can find these two amazing creatures amongst the Arctic tundra. Barrow, Alaska. This place is a wildlife photographer's paradise. It's one of the largest migratory nesting grounds in the world. So many species of migrating birds to photograph in one of the most unique and stunning landscapes, and this is our destination for a week. Dawn and myself have been wanting to get above the Arctic Circle for quite a while and been researching where to go, and this year we settled on Barrow as our destination. We were a little worried about heading out to the Arctic this late in the season for fear that most of the migratory birds would be gone, but we weren't really that deterred as we actually had two main targets in mind that weren't migratory: the Arctic fox and the amazing snowy owl. We would be just happy to catch a glimpse of either one of them, let alone photograph them. And another amazing creature of the Arctic that had a very slim chance of catching this time of year was the polar bear. And we knew that this one would be more than, a lofty goal to even see while we're up on this trip. So off we went to see what we could find above the Arctic Circle. It's about a 2-hour flight from Anchorage to Barrow. And on the way up, it was really cloudy until we got close to landing in Barrow. And then the skies opened up and get a glimpse of what the landscape looked like in this area. And it was incredible. So much water and rivers everywhere. Really got both excited about getting out our feet on the ground and seeing what we could find when we started exploring. Once we got on the ground and managed to get our luggage in our rental car, we had our first hiccup. Neither one of us had cell service. Of all the things we didn't research was cell service carriers in that area. And we both had Verizon, which is not available in Barrow, Alaska. So we had no internet outside of being at the hotel. And the kicker, our car didn't have navigation in it either. So we were blind during the whole trip. We didn't have a map. We couldn't find a map in town. We looked everywhere, all the stores, couldn't find a map. And we had nothing we could use to navigate through the town and through the tundra. So we were pretty much blind through the whole trip, other than our own memory of where we had been the day before or earlier in the day. It took us a long time just to find our hotel, as we didn't realize the town was kind of in two pieces separated by a little lagoon. But luckily, after talking to a few folks at the hotel and around town and our search prior to leaving for Barrow, Alaska, we found the roads that we needed to start searching fairly easily and could kind of remember where we were from day to day and earlier in the day to navigate from one end of the tundra to the other. But it made for an interesting week of not being able to check a map, search a topic, ID a bird we didn't really recognize because a lot of the birds were getting out of their, their breeding plumage and molting into their winter or summer patterns. So it was a little bit difficult to try to do all those things. You realize how much you rely on having technology at your fingertips to either find out where you're at or all those things that I just mentioned. On our search through the town looking for a hotel, we ran across our first bird, and it's one that was very rare where we're at, but up here in Barrow, it was a pretty common bird, and that was a snow bunting. And after a few days in Barrow, we discovered that this was a very, very common bird up here. They were everywhere in the area. So if you ever want to see a snow bunting, Barrow's where to go. We'd stopped a few times along the way just to photograph these little guys as we're going looking for a hotel search, but after a while we decided we better get back on it and find this hotel. Once we finally found our hotel, we dropped off our bags in the room and quickly changed clothes into some warmer clothes, that is, because it was already in the low 40s when we arrived in Barrow. Then we hopped back in the car to start exploring for our main two targets, the Arctic fox and that snowy owl. We knew there was two areas we really wanted to search while we were up in Barrow. One was to the north, up into the coastline, the shoreline, where we wanted to look, and another place was 2 roads south of the airport and south of town, out in the tundra. We knew that there was reports of snowy owls and fox a lot of times from everything we could read. We located the shoreline first, and we were just scouting really on our first day to figure out what the roads looked like and see where the birds were and such, and like what kind of animals and birds were we seeing. When we arrived, the weather wasn't too bad, just overcast, low winds in the high 40s, and if we only knew that those were the best conditions we're going to get for a whole week, we probably would have spent a lot more time working this road and working these birds. As a few next days, the wind never dropped below 20 miles per hour and rained almost constantly or snowed on us. The ocean environment in the Arctic is so different from every other place we had visited already in Alaska. This is a big ocean with the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic Ocean along the shoreline, and the Arctic Tundra is so flat and vast, gorgeous and intimidating at all at the same time. We saw several species of bird that were new to us, such as the Sabine gull, the red phalarope, sanderlings, brant geese, and a few others. Along with some shorebirds we see a lot in the south of Alaska, dowitchers, sandpipers, white-fronted geese, and such. I'll have a video very soon of just all the birds we encountered in our time with them, but this video is going to be more about our search for the snowy owl and the Arctic fox. But needless to say, this is a bird photographer's paradise. We finished up the shoreline loop, pretty happy with all the birds and geese that we were seeing, but no signs of the owls or the fox, so we headed out to find the other 2 roads south of the airport. We eventually located the first road south of the airport. We hadn't been down the road outside of town very long when we spotted it. A little white spot out on a frost heave near a creek. It was a snowy owl. We both couldn't believe what we were seeing, and on the first day alone, right when we arrived in the area, the owl was just sitting out on a small rise out in the tundra. It's probably about 150 yards from the side of the road. So we parked the car real quick and started our slow walk across the tundra to see if we could kind of close the distance between us and this amazing creature to hopefully get a couple shots. We snapped off a few shots about 100 yards out, and then we tried again at about 80 yards, but once we got anywhere closer to this owl, it just flew off on us out into the tundra. Just incredible to see this magnificent owl in the tundra and how graceful it was when it was flying away from us. We surveyed the terrain kind of between where and us and where the owl landed, and it was just too rough for us to try to get out to this owl where it was, because there's just too much rough terrain and there was a big creek and a ditch between us and him. So we had to give up on this owl. The tundra up here in Barrow is just a weird mix of terrain, really different than versus out in Nome. This stuff was just frost heaves and standing water almost everywhere, about a couple inches to maybe a foot of water everywhere. And it had some sticky muck on the bottom of the water and the ground that would just really grab your boot and kind of grab it like a suction cup sometimes as you pick your foot up. It made for some really tough walking. So back to the car we trudged because we just couldn't get any closer to this owl. Needless to say, we were thrilled and on cloud 9 after seeing this amazing, beautiful owl. It just floored both of us. By now it was getting pretty late in the day as we didn't arrive in Barrow till late afternoon to start with, and it was about time to head back to the hotel and get a bit of food and get some rest because we were pretty tired already from our flight in and then trudging through the tundra after this owl, and just really adrenaline pump after seeing that owl. The next morning we headed out and eventually found the second road south to explore. We eventually ran across a bird that we hadn't seen yet, and that was a Pomeranian Jaeger. I hope I'm saying that right. It's such a cool bird, and the one that ended up being a regular on our trip out in the tundra. We would see this bird a lot of Jaegers, that is. We explored more of this road south and took a couple journeys out into the tundra and saw a lot of geese, sandpipers, more Jaeger species, but still no owls or foxes to be seen so far. After a quick break for some lunch, we headed back out to explore the road that we took the day before where we'd seen the snowy owl. We made a couple stops along the way to ID and photograph some ducks and geese, but not much else. And then not too far from where we spotted the owl the day before, there it was. another snowy owl. It may have been the same one as it looked to be a male, same as the day before. You can tell the difference between a male and a female snowy owl because the females, on their feathers, on their body and their back, they have a little bit of a black band on them, and the males don't. And as the day before, the owl was quite a distance out in the tundra. We made another attempt to try to close that distance on this owl. And just like the day before, the owl flew off from us and went about almost 200 yards this time out in the tundra, just between terrain that we just really couldn't make by walking out there to it. So we got what we could as far as photos. We went back to the car and just kind of glassed the owl from a distance for quite a while to see what he might do. And the result was he just sat in the same spot for a very, very long time. So we ended up giving up and ventured down the road some more and would swing back every once in a while to check on this owl to see if it had moved at all. And for the rest of the day, it was just in the same area every time we came by, out in that same spot. We were having a blast out in the tundra searching for the owls and fox, and we're just amazed at how many birds we were seeing, even this late in the year. We actually thought more of these nesting birds would be gone this late in the year, but we had a lot of targets of opportunity to photograph. But we were really wanting a closer look at that owl and really to find an Arctic fox at this point. As the day was winding down, we were a bit tired and hungry, and the wind was really starting to pick up to a decent howl, and the temperature was dropping down in the high 30s, so it was time for us to go get some food and head to bed. On the third day, we started our day down out in the tundra in the same area we'd spotted the owl for the last couple of times. And this morning was a bit of a jolt. It was 30 degrees, howling wind, and snow. This made for a fun start to the day. As we got in the area where the owl had been hanging out, nothing. No owls. Didn't have a sight of this guy out in this area. And one of the harder things about spotting these owls out in the tundra is there's another white bird that's out in the tundra in this area that's really prevalent out here. Seagulls, of course, seagulls. Usually they're in small groups, and you kind of pretty much, when you saw those, you could pretty much write it off because you're not seeing, 10 freaking snowy owls. You're just seeing seagulls. But every once in a while, you would get this. A lone white spot way off in the distance out of the tundra on a frost eve. And we would screech to a halt in the car, get out of the car, and start glassing the area in that spot in disappointment. It'd be a lone seagull way out in the tundra sitting on a little spot and looking just like an owl. This happened to us a lot. We would have a lot of false sightings. Ooh, an owl. Nope, seagull. With no owls in sight and we didn't see any fox, we headed towards the shoreline area now and just to see what else we could find out this way. But by now, the weather had really changed on us. It was in the low 30s, like I said earlier, and the wind was howling. It was getting up to about 30 to 40 miles per hour, and it was spitting rain and at times snow. And this made the shoreline just a constant wash of big waves crashing in all the way up to the road. And that really had the shorebirds not showing up on this part of the shoreline. They were just nowhere in sight now. After having a little bit of lunch and checking out some new areas around town, we eventually headed back out to the second road south of town again. And now we had snow. I'm not talking snow, but we had blowing snow coming at us. It was a bit crazy. Coming from south central Alaska, where it's in the 50s and 60s, coming up here in the Arctic Tundra, where it's 30 degrees and blowing snow. Just amazing. And along the way, we just ran into some more Jaegers and sandpipers, but not much else. As they're making the loop back towards town, Don spotted another white spot out in the tundra. And we knew immediately that it just wasn't a gull. It just had a touch more white to it, and it was just a little bit bigger than all the other white dots being spotted all morning long, and it had much more mass to it. And sure enough, it was another male snowy owl. Just fantastic. 3 owls in 3 days. We really couldn't believe our luck in what we were seeing. So once again, we headed out into the tundra. This time we had a bit of little pipeline structure to kind of hide behind. It was just some old pipeline that comes up and had little rails on it. We could kind of use that to mask our approach. Now, of course, the owl knew right where we were at, but me and Don thought we were being really sneaky and we were really stealthy trying to get up on this bird. We did get a little closer than we had before, and we got laid down around this structure, and we took several shots of this owl. And we were still a good ways away, but at least it was the closest we'd been so far. We probably within about 70 yards of this owl this time. We made it about another 10 yards, this time getting up and walking a little bit farther, and boom, off the owl went. Had enough of us. He went up over a rise and out in the tundra and kind of out of sight this time. So Don and I kept walking out in the tundra farther, probably another 70 yards or so, about where he was roosted, and we could see where the owl went. And it was way out there. He probably went about 300 yards this time. There's no way we're going to get to this owl. There was just too much terrain between us. So we decided it was time to head back out of the tundra and get back to the car. And along the way, we ran across an abandoned hunting cabin. There's a lot of these out here in the tundra. And Don was a little more in front of me towards the front of the cabin. I was a little more to the back of the side of the cabin. Yep. And we heard it, a large, loud, barking growl, and I knew it was a fox. And sure enough, Don said he just caught a flash of a tail through the tundra and then under this cabin. We'd almost forgotten about the Arctic fox in all our days of chasing these owls. And here was one right by us, right in front of us in the tundra. We worked our way around the cabin, and under the front side of the porch in the corner, facing out into the tundra, peeked out a little Arctic fox kit. It's a wonder it didn't have another heart attack, as my heart was just racing with excitement of seeing this little fox kit. Here's one of the animals I've been dying to see since moving to Alaska, and a small kit to boot. He was so cute and fluffy in his little gray coat. He would peek around the corner out under that porch, and he would look at Don, and then he'd go to the other side, he'd look at me. And then after a few minutes, just like that, he slipped back farther under that house and out of sight. Couldn't see him anymore. We hung around sitting in the tundra trying to stay out of the wind and the snow that was blowing, and it's trying to turn into rain on us also. We were just hoping to get another glimpse of that little guy or his mom again. But after about 30 minutes or more, and we just had to leave the area because both of our hands and our feet were just getting way too cold out here because it was dipping below 30 at this point. So we ended up making our way back to the car to warm up, and we stayed close by and glassed that cabin for about another 45 minutes before we finally gave up and trying to find Mom, hoping to get a glimpse of her or that kit, with maybe they'd come out of there. So after that, we just headed back to the hotel to offload our day's images and get some rest because it was starting to get pretty late in the day. And as we were offloading these pictures onto our PC and onto our hard drives and stuff, our minds were just racing and planning for the next day's routine and where we were going to go to hopefully find these fox again and maybe that snowy owl again. So far, this has been one of our most satisfying days out in the field, even with the freezing our tails off for the most of the day. The fourth day is just more of the same. Very low 30s, lots of wind, snow turned into rain just like the day before. The very first road we took this morning was the one towards the old cabin where we saw the mom and fox kit. And before we'd fully gotten out of the town, right close to the road, in front of us is a small shack, and then we spotted it. It's an adult Arctic fox. Just sit and watch us as we kind of slowed down the car and eased out of the car with our cameras to try to get some shots of it. And for a bit, he just watched us, and then after a while, just like all foxes do, he started running around side to side of this shack, kind of looking at us and checking us out. Then eventually got tired of us, and he ran across the road out of the tundra behind some large buildings way out of sight where we couldn't get to him. So amazing to watch and so different from the red fox we used to see in south central part of Alaska. We were beside ourselves again at being able to see another Arctic fox. Just, again, two species, the owl and the Arctic fox, that I've been dying to see forever. But to really see both of these species, you've got to get more north in Alaska to really start seeing these guys. And we were just over the moon and finding both these species I've been dying to see for ages. And after this, we were still pretty excited because we were really hopeful to find that fox family from the day before that were just further down the road. But no luck. We were hoping that they were denning in this spot under the cabin, but there was no luck and there was no signs of this fox family while we were out there. We eventually exhausted our search along the road and headed back the road south of town where we had spotted the owl for the last several days. Along the way, we spotted a research station along the road with a wood plank trail that went out in the tundra, and we explored it while hoping maybe run across some other owls or maybe a fox. But no luck. We did run across some more parasitic Jaegers and more geese and shorebirds along the tundra. The Jaegers, as I said before, became a staple we could find across the tundra, hunting here and there, and even found them in town hunting. We found all three types of Jaegers out in the tundra, the Pomeranian, the parasitic, and the long-tailed Jaeger. It was so fun to watch them fly around, swoop in and out, and search the grass, tossing the grass around, looking for lemmings to feast on. It was just so cool. But it was real miserable out on this plank trail as that wind was really kicking up and had stinging rain coming right into our faces. So we headed back to the car and started to work our way back towards town to get some much needed lunch at this point. After lunch, we briefly checked out the shoreline areas and explored some new areas we hadn't really explored yet. We found some more interesting shorebirds and gulls along the way. Then we headed back to the fox family area in hopes of maybe catching a glimpse of them out in this area, because I really was hoping they were denning there. As we got just short of the cabin, we ran across a juvenile parasitic jaeger just sitting in the middle of the road that didn't really care that we were there. It was really cool. So we got out and knocked out some really cool pictures of this little guy. It was just such a cool little bird. I really enjoyed seeing all these jaegers. We eventually left our new little friend and parked in a spot where we could glass the area where we'd seen that fox family, but as usual with wildlife photography, came up empty-handed. No fox family in the area, and really not much was moving in this spot, in this area. So our next plan of attack was back to the owl areas to see if we could maybe locate that owl again. We made our way to the end of the loop, not much luck besides seeing a few false hopes that ended up just being seagulls and a few tundra swans way out in the distance. As we came back towards town on the opposite side of the road, out in the middle of the tundra, we spotted another white spot. I was resigned to thinking, well, it's probably another gull, just looked too small. But yeah, nope, it wasn't another seagull. It was another male owl. But unfortunately, this guy was just too far out in a bad area for us to even attempt trying to get to him. There's just complete marsh between us and this owl. We just couldn't get out there. It just wasn't happening. So we had to leave this guy alone and just get the shots we could from way out there, and just leave him to his business and head out. The rest of the day ended up being about the same. We had some lunch and worked our way down various roads through the tundra and saw lots of birds, but no owls and no more fox for the day. We got up on our fifth and last day in the tundra as we had our flight booked for later that evening to head out of Barrow and back to Anchorage. And we headed over to one of the local stores we had found and we'd get a breakfast sandwich and a drink. And we finally noticed that the prices up here at these local stores, how high it was. A breakfast sandwich was almost $8, and a can of soda, a 12-ounce can of soda, was $5. The store prices were pretty high out here in Barrow, but the food in the restaurants, the local restaurants, and in the hotel were not much more than they were in Central Alaska, which is really nice. After having our really expensive breakfast, we headed out down to the shoreline area rather than heading out to the tundra like we'd done the days before. Not really sure why, but it was a really good decision, as we ran across the most amazing pair of Arctic fox out this way. When we first spotted them, it was just a little head poking out of the top of a little mound with a utility pole. And then these little guys were just so much fun to watch. They would run around these buildings, under the buildings, out in the shoreline, and then come back towards us and run back out, and they would dig up some food and eat it and all this stuff. We watched these two guys for about 45 minutes more before they finally moved to an area that we just couldn't get to along the shoreline anymore. They're just moving too fast, and they eventually got over a rise and we couldn't see them anymore. So cool to watch these guys. Another really cool sight out along the road was these bowhead whale skulls. There are just several of them out here along the road to the shoreline, as they still hunt the bowhead whales out in this part of Alaska. These skulls were such an amazing sight, and being able to get up close to examine them was just such a treat. We didn't find any more fox or owls for the rest of the day before we had to pack up and head to the airport in the early evening, but we did see several more birds and ducks along the way. And I'll have another video very soon about our adventures with these amazing birds, but this video I wanted to share more of our time with these snowy owls and the Arctic fox. And those times we got to spend with both species was something we'll both never forget. This trip was very special for both of us. We didn't get the picture with snowy owl, but we got to see them, and that was more than enough for both of us. And then to get to see the Arctic fox several times, just incredible. We weren't even sure we'd get to see either of them, but to see an owl on the first day, just so incredibly lucky. And as I always say, only in Alaska. Well, I hope you enjoyed spending time with us on our Arctic adventure. And as always, guys, until next time, get outside and go run that shutter. I'm in the first row, so I don't know. I can, yeah. If I can, I will.